Welcome to our lightning talk on the user experience of research presentations. During this short talk, we'll be presenting our approach for leveraging the design process to create user-centered solutions in the form of research presentations. I'm Dr. Christine Toh from the University of Nebraska at Omaha, and I'll be presenting this work with my co-authors today, Jonathan Struby, who's in graphic design at my institution, and Dr. Elizabeth Starkey from Penn State. The issue of how to effectively present our work in the form of presentations is not new. We're all familiar with Michael Alley's work on the assertion evidence format of presenting research, which has provided a foundation for creating good technical presentations. Reviewing presentations from this conference over the past several years, my co-authors and I realize that most of us can recognize good presentations when we see them, but it can be difficult to understand the design principles behind them. Thankfully, there are entire disciplines dedicated to the study of visual design and messaging, and by unpacking formalized knowledge about how to represent information effectively, we can pull back the curtain on why frameworks such as assertion evidence work, and go one step further and empower you, the researcher, to systematically evaluate your presentations for effective design. We assert that the process of developing effective research presentations follows the design process. Thinking about the design of research presentations this way allows us to focus on creating an effective user experience, since we believe that presentations really are a two-way street involving the building of a shared understanding between the presenter and the audience. And now, my colleague Jonathan Struby.
When designing your slides, there are visual principles to keep in mind. Set a primary point and only one point per slide. This can be done through image, text, or both, but keep the message simple and explore the space with intention. Remember, the negative space is your friend. Don't fill up the slide. Space allows the eye and the mind to focus. Presenters, often driven by software conventions, think that predefined templates and filling slides with large amounts of information will ensure that every detail is covered. But the opposite is true. The more information that is jammed into a single slide leads to a blurring of message and ultimately leaves the viewer in the dark. Think of slides working on their own and in a sequence. Think of them as a series of connected frames, such as how a series of still images are linked together to create a movie. If the information is complex, break it down into simple, digestible chunks. Stepping through slides can happen very quickly and intentionally. To do this, we must establish hierarchy. What is hierarchy? Hierarchy is a clearly defined logic and order. There are two types. The first is visual hierarchy, and this refers to physical elements in space and defines the visual plane of the slide. Let's pause and take note of the border on these slides. The border helps us to remember that all space is observed through framal reference, meaning that space is only defined by the edges that one can observe. When elements are placed in space, we use this reference to compare and understand their relationship. We see the first element on the left and we think that it is big. And when the second element on the right enters, our thoughts are reinforced through comparison with the new element. We can then mentally define their order of importance. When content is added, we can also think about the narrative quality of these elements. On the left, we see the human scale of the moon confirmed by the figure in the foreground. But when compared to our traditional human view of the moon, we are reoriented through comparison. Next is typographic hierarchy. This is the clearly defined logic and order within the written content. This is controlled by the 5 principles of typographic contrast. The first is case, most often observed in sentence structure. Next, weight, defined by the thickness of individual letter strokes. And third, style, often referring to classification, serif having the tiny feet, or sans meaning without the tiny feet, or it may also refer to the pitch of letter strokes, most notably italic or oblique. Fourth is scale, the most obvious and widely used. And fifth is orientation, which refers to the direction type is placed relative to the framal reference. In setting type, use a grid. Keep it consistent and use it to define the placement of your content element. Define a typographic system and stick to it. Limit type scale. 3 is a good choice. Your grid and type system will define your page structure and keep things consistent. When adding imagery or graphics, don't be afraid to break or violate the grid to create an organized composition. When the grid is removed, we can see functional hierarchy in both space and typography. And now, my colleague, Elizabeth Starkey.
Now that you have some visual principles to utilize in your slide design, it's important to consider the big picture. We want to start with research and understanding the requirements of the venue we're presenting in. As we're now giving presentations virtually for conferences and in the classroom, we need to think about how we deliver that content. Not only do we have to consider our slide design, but also whether or not we want to show the speaker using picture-in-picture or over-the-shoulder broadcast style, or if we want to stick with a simple voiceover. While we think of being seen during in-person presentations, picture-in-picture can often distract from our slide message. Next, we'll start the ideation process by sketching out key frames in our storyboard. During this process, we want to think like a director by identifying the significant plot moments and capturing them in a slide using visual and written support. Next, we want to work on our first draft of our visual aids and our script. We want to approach this differently than merely reading a paper to the audience. The visuals and written words should complement what's spoken rather than repeat them. And now we iterate. Practice, practice, practice. Practice your script and practice it with people so they can give you feedback and you can iterate on your design. This lightning talk is just the beginning of our research. There's a forthcoming paper and we plan to create resources and tools for presentation creation. So now we need your help. Tell us what you think about this research and what tools and teaching devices you wish to see created in the future by following the link on the screen. Thank you.